cameras were ready for perfection. Billionaire, ribboned key, flawless wife. Then he froze, because the woman walking toward the stage was his ex. And the little girl holding another man's hand? His daughter. Burns Hawthorne had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times. The opening of his 5th luxury hotel should have been mechanical. By now, smile for the cameras, cut the ribbon, pop the champagne. His wife Sophia stood beside him in her designer dress, her practiced smile worth its weight in publicity gold. The mayor was there. The press was there. Everyone who mattered in San Francisco's elite circles had gathered to witness another Hawthorne Hotel's triumph. But then he saw her. Riley Isaiah walked through the crowd like she owned time itself, unhurried. Despite being 15 minutes late to his carefully orchestrated event, she wore a simple black dress, nothing like the couture pieces he used to buy her. Her hair fell naturally around her shoulders, not styled within an inch of its life like Sophia's. She looked free. The little girl beside her couldn't have been more than 4 years old. Dark hair like Riley's, but those eyes, Burns knew those eyes. They were his mother's eyes. They were his eyes. Burns? Sophia's sharp whisper cut through his paralysis. The ribbon. Everyone's waiting. His hand found the oversized scissors, but his gaze stayed locked on Riley as she found a spot near the back, lifting the child onto her hip so she could see better. The man beside them, tall, bearded, wearing jeans to a black tie event, put his hand on Riley's lower back with casual ownership. The little girl called him Daddy. The scissors felt like lead in Burns's hands. 5 years ago, Riley had walked out of his life with nothing but a suitcase and a broken heart. She'd never mentioned a pregnancy, never asked for money, never sent a single photo. And now, here she stood at his moment of triumph, holding living proof that his control had limits. "Mr. Hawthorne?" The mayor's voice carried concern. "Are you ready? Ready?" Burns had built an empire on being ready. He'd married the right woman, networked with the right people, and crushed the right competitors. But nothing had prepared him for this moment, when success and failure occupied the same frame. Ever watched your big moment turn into someone else's homecoming? Ever tried to fix a heart with headlines? Burns cut the ribbon, but his hands moved on autopilot. The champagne cork popped, but he didn't hear it. All he could process was Riley's gentle laugh as the bearded man whispered something in her ear. That laugh used to belong to him. He'd worked 60-hour weeks to buy her everything, and she'd left him for someone who made her laugh in jeans at a black tie event. You know that feeling when you realize you've been keeping score in a game nobody else was playing? When you've been building monuments to love, while love itself walked out the back door looking for something as simple as presence? Burns had given Riley diamonds, but apparently she'd wanted dinner conversations. He'd given her a penthouse, but she'd wanted a partner who knew their daughter's middle name. Their daughter. The words felt foreign in his mind. While he'd been conquering markets and acquiring properties, Riley had been conquering midnight fevers and acquiring memories. She'd been there for first words, first steps, first days of preschool. He'd been in boardrooms, collecting victories that suddenly felt hollow as champagne bubbles. The crowd applauded his speech about excellence and vision, but Burns watched Riley bend down to tie the little girl's shoe. Such a small gesture, so unremarkable, yet it contained more intimacy than all the grand gestures he'd ever orchestrated. The bearded man held Riley's purse without being asked. They moved like dancers who knew each other's rhythms, while Burns and Sophia stood beside each other like expensive strangers. When success gets loud and love goes hungry, control looks like care. Until it breaks everything. Burns had controlled every variable in his life. He'd scheduled affection between mergers, penciled in romance around acquisitions. He'd treated love like a business unit that could run itself, while he focused on what he called real work. But love doesn't wait in conference rooms. It doesn't pause for quarterly reports. It either grows in the daily soil of attention, or it finds another garden. Riley had found another garden, and she'd planted a child there, his child, in soil he'd never helped tend. The question that haunted him wasn't why she'd left. It was why she'd never told him what they'd created together before she walked away. Stay to the end. The line he speaks on a milk crate will live in your head rent-free. The reception continued around Burns like a movie he wasn't watching. Sophia worked the room with surgical precision, collecting business cards and compliments, while he stood frozen at the bar, scotch untouched. Riley hadn't approached him. She didn't need to. Her presence alone had already rewritten his entire evening. The little girl broke free from the bearded man's hand and ran toward the dessert table, her laughter cutting through the sophisticated murmur of conversation. She moved with Riley's grace, but something in her determined stride belonged entirely to Burns. He knew that walk. He'd perfected it in boardrooms across 3 continents. His daughter had inherited his march toward what she wanted. "Lily, careful," Riley called out, and Burns finally had a name for the child he'd never known existed. Lily. Riley had named their daughter after his grandmother, the woman who'd raised him, when his parents were too busy building their own empire to notice their son. The recognition hit him like a physical blow. Even in her anger, even in her absence, Riley had honored his history. He wanted to walk over. He wanted to demand answers. He wanted to know why Riley had chosen silence over child support, pride over partnership. But more than anything, he wanted to know what Lily's voice sounded like when she said daddy to a man who wasn't him. If presence is greater than presence, like this video, share it, and subscribe to Rich Billionaires romance stories. Comment key. So I know you're here for the twist. Because here's what nobody tells you about winning everything: sometimes the trophy case becomes a prison. Burns had every key to every door that mattered in business, but he'd lost the key to the only room where love had once lived. He'd secured his legacy in steel and glass, but missed the chance to secure it in bedtime stories and birthday wishes. Before this night ends, Burns will stand on a milk crate in his own hotel parking lot, abandoning every carefully crafted word for one raw truth. He'll speak directly to Riley through the crowd, through the years, through the pain, and what he says will make you question everything you thought you knew about choosing between success and family. The cameras came for a ribbon cutting. They stayed for a resurrection. The marble floor of the Hawthorne Grand reflected light like pooled mercury. Every surface had been polished to mirror perfection, from the brass fixtures to the crystal chandeliers that hung like frozen fireworks above the crowd. A velvet ribbon stretched across the main entrance, and beside it, displayed on burgundy silk, lay the ceremonial key. Not just any key, a brass masterpiece, heavy as legacy, ornate as ambition. The string quartet played Mozart, their notes floating through air that smelled of lilies and expensive perfume. Burns Hawthorne stood at the podium in his graphite silk suit, custom tailored to suggest power without shouting it. Every thread had been selected to convey a message: success with sophistication, wealth with restraint. Beside him, Sophia, who went by Sable at events like these, maintained her position like a trophy that had learned to pose itself. She wore ivory, of course. Sable always wore colors that photographed well against Burns's darker tones. They'd become a brand together, their aesthetic as coordinated as their ambitions. The society photographers loved them. The gossip columns called them power perfected. Tonight was meant to cement that image forever. The master of ceremonies approached the microphone, his voice carrying across the hushed assembly. "Ladies and gentlemen, before we proceed with the ribbon cutting, we have a special recognition to make. The Hawthorne Grand wouldn't exist without the tireless efforts of our construction team. Please welcome the family who represents our workers' dedication, Riley Isaiah and her daughter." The words hung in the air like a sword about to fall. Burns's hand, reaching for his champagne glass, stopped midway. Riley Isaiah, the name he'd trained himself not to think. The name he'd deleted from his phone but never from his memory. Ansel, work-worn hands visible even from the stage, walked Riley and Mira forward. His flannel shirt, cleaned but still clearly flannel, stood out among the tuxedos like truth among promises. He held Mira's small hand with the careful strength of someone who built things for a living, while his other hand rested protectively on Riley's back. Riley moved through the crowd wearing navy blue, not black as Burns had thought earlier. The dress was simple, probably off a department store rack, but she carried it like couture. Her hair caught the light as she walked, and Burns remembered how it used to fan across his pillow in the morning sun. Now another man guided her through his world. Mira, 4 years old with eyes that belonged to Burns's bloodline, wore a yellow dress that had seen better days but had been carefully pressed for this occasion. She walked with that specific confidence of children who know they're loved, occasionally skipping despite Riley's gentle reminders to walk slowly. Burns's smile shatters. The expression he'd worn for 100 ribbon cuttings cracked like ice under pressure. His jaw locked. His breathing went shallow. Sophia noticed immediately. She'd built a career on reading his micro-expressions. And her fingernails pressed warning crescents into his forearm. Cameras tick like rain. The sound filled the space between heartbeats. Every photographer in the room sensed the shift in energy, even if they didn't understand it. They turned their lenses toward Burns, catching the exact moment when a billionaire discovered that money couldn't buy back time. Mr. Hawthorne, the master of ceremonies, continued, oblivious to the earthquake happening. In Burns's chest, perhaps you'd like to thank our worker representatives personally? The question required movement, required Burns to walk toward Riley, to acknowledge Ansel's handshake, to look directly at the child who carried his DNA, but called another man father. The crowd waited. The cameras waited. His entire constructed world waited to see if Burns Hawthorne could perform this simple social gesture without revealing that his kingdom had just revealed its first unconquerable territory. Riley's eyes met him across the space. No surprise registered on her face. She'd known he would be here. This was his hotel after all. She'd come anyway. That detail landed like a punch. She no longer organized her life around avoiding him. This was supposed to be his redemption headline. Instead, it's their moment. 6 months ago, Burns had nearly lost everything. A hostile takeover attempt, a publicity nightmare involving worker conditions, and Sophia's very public affair with his CFO had left his empire wobbling. He'd fought back with ruthless efficiency, bought out the hostile investors, launched a worker benefit program that made international news, and somehow convinced Sophia to play the reformed wife for the cameras. Tonight's opening was meant to be the final brushstroke on his masterpiece of recovery. The press release had already been distributed. Burns Hawthorne opens doors to luxury and community. The photos were supposed to show him cutting the ribbon with Sophia, champagne toasts with city officials, handshakes with carefully selected workers who'd testify to his generosity. Every detail had been orchestrated to write a new story over the old scandals. But now, Riley stood in his carefully constructed narrative, like a truth he couldn't edit. Ansel's presence beside her rewrote everything. The man who actually worked construction, whose hands bore the calluses of real labor, standing where Burns's marketing team had planned to place actors playing workers. And Mira was the detail that would make every headline tomorrow, because the resemblance was undeniable. The photographers might not know the history, but they knew a story when they saw one. The little girl with Burns Hawthorne's eyes, standing beside a woman who wasn't his wife, was carried by a man who wore work boots to a gala. This was the kind of image that sold papers, generated clicks, fueled gossip for weeks. Thank you for having us. Riley's voice carried across the space, clear and controlled. She wasn't playing anyone's game, not Burns's, not the media's, not even Ansel's. She stood there as herself, a woman who'd chosen love over luxury and seemed to have found both anyway, just not in the packaging Burns had offered. The master of ceremonies gestured for them to approach the ribbon. Mr. Isaiah has overseen the installation of every window in this building, he announced. His attention to detail ensures that every room captures perfect light. The irony wasn't lost on Burns. Ansel had built the windows through which Burns now watched the life he could have had. Every pane of glass in his monument to success had been fitted by the man who went home to Riley each night. Burns stepped forward because standing still would have been worse. Each step toward the ribbon was a step toward Riley, toward Mira, toward Ansel's outstretched hand waiting to shake his. The cameras captured every moment, but they couldn't capture the war inside Burns's chest, the part of him that wanted to claim his daughter competing with the part that recognized he had no right to claim anything anymore. This wasn't his redemption story anymore. It was Riley's victory lap, even if she hadn't meant it to be. The Cypress coffee shop sat wedged between a laundromat and a bookstore. The kind of place where baristas knew your name and your heartbreak. Burns had stumbled in one October morning, escaping a board meeting that felt like drowning. Riley was sketching on napkins at the corner table, designing buildings that would never get built because she couldn't afford the degree to make her dreams legitimate. That foundation won't hold, he'd said, looking over her shoulder without invitation. Neither will your marriage, she'd replied, glancing at the tan line where his wedding ring should have been. He'd sat down uninvited. She'd let him stay. Their beginning played out in borrowed moments. Napkin sketches became blueprint discussions. Coffee became dinner. Dinner became takeout containers scattered across her studio apartment floor while they talked until 3 a.m. about everything except what they were becoming to each other. The first I love you happened by accident. Burns had been explaining a development deal when Riley touched his hand and said, "Stop selling me something. I already bought it. I love you, you idiot." He'd knocked over his wine in his rush to kiss her. The stain never came out of her carpet. She kept that rug anyway, called it their first piece of art together. They built a world in the margins of his official life. While Sophia attended charity galas alone, making excuses for his absence, Burns learned how. Riley took her coffee, which side of the bed she preferred, the way she hummed while cooking. Mira arrived with the sunrise on a Tuesday that smelled like cinnamon and possibility. Riley had been baking bread at 4 a.m., unable to sleep through the early contractions. The apartment, their secret apartment, the one Burns paid for but only Sophia, his lawyer would later discover, glowed with thrift store lamplight and hope. Burns had actually been there, holding Riley's hand through 17 hours of labor. He'd canceled 3 meetings, ignored 47 calls, and let $1 million deal slip away. Because Riley needed him, and for once, just once, he'd chosen her need over his empire's hunger. Mira came out quiet, eyes wide open, like she was taking notes on the world from her first breath. The nurse placed her on Riley's chest, and Burns felt something crack open in his chest. A space he hadn't known was sealed shut. "She has your mother's eyes," Riley whispered, exhausted but radiant. "She has your stubbornness," Burns replied, watching Mira's tiny fist grip his finger with surprising strength. The warm apartment became their cocoon for exactly 6 days. Burns called it a business trip. Sophia didn't question it. She was busy with her trainer, who was teaching her more than Pilates. For 6 days, Burns learned the rhythm of bottles and diapers, discovered that Mira only slept when he hummed off-key Beatles songs, understood that love could be as simple as watching Riley nurse their daughter in the amber light of dawn. Then Monday arrived with its demands, and Burns remembered he had an empire to run. Burns's calendar became his Bible, and Riley's needs became suggestions he'd get to later. Board meetings trumped baby's first smile. Acquisition negotiations overwrote anniversary dinners. He'd promised to leave early, then text at midnight that the Tokyo markets needed attention. "Love without attention becomes a rumor," Riley told him one night when he'd arrived to find Mira already asleep. "She won't know you from your photos in the business journals." "I'm doing this for her," Burns insisted, the lie comfortable as an old shoe. "For both of you. The empire I'm building is a monument to your absence," Riley finished. "I don't need an empire, Burns. I need a partner. Mira doesn't need trust funds. She needs a father." But Burns had been raised to believe that love looked like provision, that care meant bank accounts, that presence could be purchased with presents. He bought Riley a car she didn't drive, jewelry she didn't wear, clothes that hung in the closet with tags still attached. Meanwhile, Riley painted Mira's nursery herself, built her crib from scratch, and sang her to sleep every night alone. The distance grew in increments. First, Burns missed bedtime, then bath time, then dinner. Soon, he was visiting his own daughter, like a relative from out of town, bringing guilt gifts that couldn't fill the father-shaped hole in her routine. Riley stopped complaining. That should have been Burns's first warning. When someone stops fighting for your attention, they've started planning their exit. The first pediatric appointment he missed because the board needs me became the beginning of their end. Mira had been running a fever for 2 days. Riley had called Burns 17 times, each message more desperate than the last. The appointment was at 2 p.m. on a Thursday. Burns had promised, sworn, he'd be there. He'd even written it in his sacred calendar, blocked out the time, and told his assistant that nothing could move this commitment. Then the call came from Hong Kong. A rival was moving on a property Burns had been stalking for 2 years. If he didn't act within the hour, he'd lose the deal that would crown his West Coast expansion. The board was assembled, waiting for his leadership, demanding his presence. "The baby's sick," his assistant had reminded him quietly. "Babies get sick," Burns had replied, already walking toward the boardroom. "It's probably just teething. Riley's overreacting." It wasn't teething. It was an ear infection that would leave Mira partially deaf in her left ear, something they could have prevented with earlier intervention. Riley sat in that pediatric waiting room alone, holding their screaming daughter, watching other families where both parents showed up for the scary moments. When Burns finally arrived at the hospital at 9 p.m., deal secured and champagne still on his breath from the celebration, Riley didn't even look up. "We're done," she said quietly, filling out paperwork with the steady hand of someone who'd already grieved the relationship. "The board needed you. Now they can have you." He throws solutions. She asks for presence. The pattern established itself like a disease progressing through stages. Riley would express a need, and Burns would throw money at it. She'd say Mira missed him. He'd send designer toys from FAO Schwartz. She'd mention feeling isolated. He'd hire a housekeeper she didn't want. She'd ask him to come home for dinner. He'd have his assistant order delivery from the city's best restaurant. "I don't need a 5-star meal," Riley said one night, staring at the untouched feast on their dining table. "I need you to sit across from me and ask about my day." "I'm solving the problem," Burns insisted, checking his phone even as he spoke. "You said you were tired of cooking." "I said I was tired of cooking alone." But Burns had been programmed to believe that every problem had a price tag, every hurt had a purchasable cure. When Riley mentioned the apartment felt cramped, he bought a penthouse. When she said Mira needed stability, he hired 3 nannies. When she cried that she felt invisible, he bought her a car so expensive that everyone would look. "You're not listening," Riley would say. "I'm fixing," Burns would counter. The misses accumulated like compound interest on a debt. Riley's art supplies gathered dust because Burns had bought her a professional studio she never asked for, located across town from Mira's necessities. The engagement ring he'd selected, 10 carats of perfection, sat untouched in its vault because Riley wanted a simple band and a conversation about their future, not a press release about their engagement. Each solution pushed them further apart, building a wall of good intentions that neither could climb. "You always think too small." He means fear. She hears her life. The fight started over preschools. Riley had found a small Montessori program 6 blocks away, run by a woman who knew every child's middle name and favorite story. Burns had already enrolled Mira in the city's most exclusive preparatory academy, where senators' children learned Mandarin before they could properly pronounce their own names. "She needs to be around normal kids," Riley argued, holding the Montessori brochure like evidence. "She needs advantages," Burns countered, his voice taking on the edge he used in hostile negotiations. "That little school, it's fine for ordinary children, but Mira isn't ordinary. She's 4 years old, Burns. She is exactly as ordinary and extraordinary as every other 4-year-old. That's the problem with you," Burns said, the words escaping before thought could catch them. "You always think too small. You're so afraid of reaching for more that you'd rather hide in mediocrity." The silence that followed had weight, like water filling lungs. Burns had meant the fear. The way Riley pulled back from the spotlight, declined the charity invitations, refused to play the Billionaire's girlfriend game. He'd meant her reluctance to dream bigger, reach higher, claim more. He'd been talking about her potential, not her reality. But Riley heard her life being called insufficient. She heard her childhood in a 2-bedroom ranch, her parents who worked double shifts, her community college degree, her thrift store furniture, her handmade birthday parties, her simple dreams of family dinners and bedtime stories. She heard Burns calling everything she was and everything she came from too small. "Get out," she said quietly. "Riley, I didn't mean—" "Get out of my small apartment. Get out of my small life. Get out. I need a home where love is daily, not a press release. Burns found the note 3 days later when he returned with apologies and roses. Riley had written it on the back of one of her old sketches, the first building she'd ever shown him, the one whose foundation he'd criticized. The symbolism wasn't lost on him, but understanding it didn't change the reality of her absence. The apartment echoed with their ghosts. Mira's toys remained scattered across the living room floor, but the clothes were gone. Riley's art supplies sat abandoned, but her grandmother's rocking chair had vanished. She'd taken only what mattered, leaving behind everything Burns had bought. Lawyers, settlement, Burns' name up in lights, Riley's off guest lists. The legal proceedings moved with the efficiency Burns usually admired. Riley asked for nothing. No child support, no alimony, no property division. She wanted a clean break, complete severance, total disconnection. Her lawyer, a gray-haired woman who looked at Burns like he was something, stuck to her shoe, presented the terms with clinical detachment. My client requests no contact. She'll handle all expenses related to the child independently. That's ridiculous, Burns's attorney protested. Mr. Hawthorne has rights. Rights he forfeited through absence, Riley's lawyer interrupted. However, if Mr. Hawthorne insists on asserting paternal claims, we're prepared to document every missed appointment, every broken promise, every instance where business preceded his daughter's needs. Burns could have fought, could have demanded custody arrangements, visitation schedules, legal acknowledgement of paternity, but fighting would have meant publicity, and publicity would have meant explaining why the billionaire secret family lived in a 2-bedroom apartment while he inhabited a mansion with his legal wife. So he signed. His name went up on another hotel. Riley's name disappeared from every list that mattered in his world. Charity rosters, gala invitations, the contacts in his phone. She became a ghost he'd paid to disappear. Except ghosts don't usually take your daughter with them. He stares at a bassinet-shaped silence and chooses speed over understanding. The nursery in his penthouse remained exactly as Riley had left it. Burns would stand in the doorway sometimes, usually after his third scotch, staring at the expensive bassinet that had held Mira for exactly 0 nights. She'd preferred the second-hand crib in Riley's apartment, the one that creaked when you rocked it, the one surrounded by Riley's hand-painted murals instead of the designer wallpaper Burns had commissioned. The silence in that room had a shape, bassinet-shaped, daughter-shaped, family-shaped. It was a specific kind of quiet that existed only in spaces where children should be, but weren't. Burns could have sat with that silence, learned from it, let it teach him about the difference between acquiring and nurturing, between providing and loving. Instead, he chose speed, more deals, more properties, more acquisitions. He scheduled meetings during the hours when the silence grew loudest. He traveled constantly, each new hotel a monument to his ability to build everything except the one structure that mattered. He married Sophia within 6 months, a business merger disguised as romance, because her presence filled rooms even if it couldn't fill the bassinet-shaped hole in his life. "Why do you keep that nursery?" Sophia asked once, finding him standing in the doorway at 2 a.m. "Tax purposes," he lied. "Home office deduction." She knew he was lying but didn't care enough to pursue the truth. Their relationship operated on surfaces, which suited them both. Neither wanted to excavate the other's depths. Neither wanted to acknowledge that they were using each other as shields against their separate loneliness. Burns accelerated through the years following Riley's departure, building an empire on the grave of his family. Every new success felt like vindication. See, he was right to choose ambition. Every headline proved his priorities. Burns Hawthorne, the man who never stopped climbing. But speed can't outrun consequences. It only delays the collision. Boardroom pitch, homeward keys, do good, get good press. Burns says, yes. Sable, let's mean this, not just perform it. The conference room smelled like leather and ambition when the PR team unveiled their masterstroke. Homeward keys, the lead strategist announced, clicking through slides that showed hard-working families receiving house keys from Burns Hawthorne himself. "We identify deserving families from our construction crews. Gift them homes during the gala. Optics are perfect. Billionaire, giving back to the people who build his empire." Burns studied the projections. Expected media reach, 17 million. Sentiment analysis, 87% positive. Brand rehabilitation score, off the charts. The numbers sang the song he wanted to hear. Redemption through calculated generosity. Budget? He asked. 3 houses, middle-tier neighborhoods. Total investment, $1.2 million. Return in publicity value, approximately $4 million. It's a win, Mr. Hawthorne. Do it, Burns said, already mentally moving to the next agenda item. But Sophia, Sable in public, but Sophia in these rooms where the image got constructed, placed her manicured hand on the table. Let's mean this, not just perform it. The room went quiet. Sophia rarely spoke in board meetings, content to be decoration rather than participant. But something in her voice carried weight today. If we're giving homes, she continued, let's give homes that matter, not just structures that photograph well. Check the school districts. Consider the commutes. Think about what these families actually need, not just what makes us look generous. Burns studied his wife with new interest. Their marriage operated on mutual convenience, but occasionally, like now, he glimpsed the woman beneath the performance, the one who'd perhaps chosen him for more than his money, who might actually want their union to mean something beyond merged assets. Fine, he agreed. Make it real. But it still needs to be photographed well. Sophia smiled, the expression genuine for once. Reality photographs better than fiction, Burns. You just have to light it correctly. No one checks the list. Small city, big lesson. The selection process ran on autopilot. HR pulled files, matched criteria, checked background reports for anything embarrassing. 3 families emerged as perfect candidates, long-term employees, young children, currently renting in transitional neighborhoods. The PR team crafted their stories, prepared their moments, scheduled their surprise appearances at the gala. Nobody thought to cross-reference the names with Burns's personal history. Why would they? His private life remained so compartmentalized that his own assistant didn't know he'd had a relationship before Sophia. The name Riley Isaiah appeared on the list like any other. Single mother, design consultant. For the construction team, 4-year-old daughter, currently renting a 2-bedroom apartment. Perfect, the PR director had said, scanning her file. Single mother narrative plays beautifully. Shows we support working women. The invitation went out through standard channels. Riley received it at her desk on a Tuesday, read it twice, then called Ansel. They want to give us a house, she said, disbelief coloring her voice. Us? Ansel asked, carefully. They'd been together 2 years but maintained separate residences, respectful of boundaries and Mira's need for stability. Me and Mira. At Burns's gala, in front of everyone, the silence stretched between them, filled with understanding. Ansel knew who Burns was to Riley, to Mira. He knew the history that Riley had shared in careful doses, like medicine too strong to take all at once. You don't have to accept, Ansel said finally. I know, Riley replied, but maybe it's time. Maybe facing him publicly, on his stage, with his rules. Maybe that's how I finally close that chapter. And Mira? We'll see that sometimes people who hurt you can still do good things. That's a lesson too. The small city suddenly felt smaller. Every connection, every overlap, every degree of separation collapsed into inevitability. Burns thought he controlled his world through corporate hierarchy, but life operates on different organizational principles. Sometimes the universe insists on collisions that no amount of money can prevent. Gala reprise, the freeze. Burn hands over the key he thought would fix everything. The moment arrived like déjà vu with different costuming. Burns stood at the podium, Sophia beside him, the ceremonial keys on their velvet cushions waiting to transform lives. The first 2 families had received their keys to sustained applause. A janitor with 3 kids, an electrician caring for his elderly parents. Feel-good stories that would trend by morning. Our final recipient, the announcer's voice carried across the hushed crowd, represents the future we're building. Riley Isaiah, single mother and design consultant whose architectural insights have shaped the very building we celebrate tonight. Riley walked forward, Mira's hand in hers, Ansel walking beside them but slightly behind. Present, but not presumptuous. She wore the same navy dress from earlier, refusing to change into something provided by Burns's team. Mira had added a yellow cardigan against the evening chill, and someone, probably Ansel, had given her a small sunflower to carry. Burns's hand found the key, but his fingers felt disconnected from his brain. The weight of it, both physical and symbolic, threatened to pull him through the stage floor. This key was supposed to fix everything. It was his apology without words, his provision without presence, his love without the mess of actually loving. Riley reached the stage, helped Mira up the steps, then stood before Burns with the kind of composure that comes from having already survived your worst moment. She didn't avoid his eyes. She didn't flinch when he stepped forward. She simply existed in her own space, complete without his validation. "Miss Isaiah," Burns managed, his voice steady despite the earthquake in his chest. "This key represents more than a house. It represents home, stability, and—" he paused, the prepared speech crumbling, "and recognition of what you've built, despite obstacles." He handed her the key, their fingers brushing for the first time in 5 years. The contact lasted a millisecond, but carried the weight of their entire history. First coffee, first kiss, first fight, last goodbye. "Thank you, Mr. Hawthorne," Riley said clearly, professionally, as if he were any other CEO handing her any other key. "Mira and I are grateful for this opportunity." Mira looked up at Burns with those eyes, his mother's eyes, his eyes, and smiled. "Pretty key," she said, then turned to Ansel. "Can we go home now?" After stage, congrats exchange, Mira's sunflower plan. Burn asks for a path to show up without turning it into this. Riley, boundaries protect what's growing. Be where you say you'll be. Gentle, yes. The aftermath happened in the wings, away from cameras, but not from consequence. Riley stood by the exit, helping Mira with her cardigan, while Ansel held their coats. Burns approached like someone defusing a bomb, Sophia tactfully finding somewhere else to be. "Congratulations," Burns said, the word inadequate as a napkin against a flood. "It's a generous gift," Riley replied, still formal, still controlled. Mira tugged on her mother's dress. "Mama, can we plant sunflowers at the new house, like at Ansel's?" The question hung between them, innocent and devastating. Mira was planning a future in a house Burns had provided, with a man who wasn't him, creating memories he wouldn't share. "We'll see, baby," Riley said softly, then looked at Burns. "Thank you, truly. This will change our lives. I want—" Burns started, then stopped, reorganized, tried again. "Is there a way I could show up? Without turning it into this?" He gestured at the gala, the cameras, the performance of generosity. "Just show up?" Riley studied him for a long moment. Behind them, the party continued, but here in this pocket of honesty, time moved differently. "Boundaries protect what's growing," she said finally. "Mira doesn't know you're anything more than Mr. Hawthorne who owns Mommy's company. That needs to stay true for now. But if you want to be present, actually present, not sending gifts or making grand gestures, then yes, there's a path." "What kind of path?" "The kind where you show up when you say you will, where you don't promise what you can't deliver, where you understand that Ansel is her father figure now, and that won't change just because biology says different." "I can do that," Burns said quickly, too quickly. Riley smiled sadly. "No, you can't. Not yet. But maybe you can learn. Start small. Her preschool has a spring festival next month. Volunteers needed for setup. 7 a.m., no cameras, no recognition, just hands and hammers. I'll be there." "Be where you say you'll be," Riley repeated, then took Mira's hand and walked away, leaving Burns with a gentle yes that felt harder to carry than any no. Saturday volunteer day, teen teacher says, measure twice. Burn learns to be bad at things without hiding. The teenager running the saw station couldn't have been older than 16. Marcus, according to his volunteer badge, with sawdust in his hair and confidence in his stance. He looked at Burns's soft hands, an expensive watch forgotten on his wrist, and assigned him the simplest task, measuring and marking wood for cuts. "Measure twice, cut once," Marcus instructed, demonstrating with the practiced ease of someone who'd grown up building. Better to waste 30 seconds checking than waste good lumber. Burns, who made million-dollar decisions in seconds, found himself struggling with a tape measure. His first 3 measurements were wrong. Marcus caught each error patiently, without mockery, but also without deference. To this kid, Burns was just another adult who didn't know how to read 16ths on a ruler. Like this, Marcus showed him again, his young hands steady and sure. See the little lines? Each one matters. In his boardroom, Burns never admitted ignorance. Weakness was blood in corporate water. But here, surrounded by parents and teachers who built things with their hands every weekend, hiding incompetence would have been more shameful than acknowledging it. I'm not getting it, Burns admitted, the words foreign in his mouth. That's okay, Marcus said simply. Nobody's good at everything on the first try. Keep practicing. So Burns practiced, measured, checked, measured again. Let a teenager half his age correct his technique without defending his ego. Learn to be bad at something without crafting an excuse or delegating the difficulty. Mira, we're building a planter. He treats it like mission critical. Ansel nods. Respect, not rivalry. Mira found him during the lunch break, approaching with the determination Riley had warned him about. She wore overalls with butterflies on the pockets and carried a diagram drawn in crayon. We're building a planter, she announced, not asking but informing. For sunflowers. You can help. The design was ambitious for a 4-year-old's imagination. 3 tiers, painted yellow, with what appeared to be a fairy door drawn on the side. Burns studied it like he'd study acquisition proposals, seeing past the crayon to the vision underneath. We'll need different-sized boxes, he said seriously, and drainage holes. Sunflowers need good drainage. Mira nodded solemnly. Ansel said that too. He's getting the drill. The 3 of them worked together without awkwardness, united by Mira's project management. Ansel drilled drainage holes while Burns measured and cut boards to Mira's specifications. When Burns suggested a modification to make the structure more stable, he directed the comment to Mira, not over her head to Ansel. Your call, boss, Ansel said to Mira, reinforcing her authority. They painted it yellow as the sun started setting, Mira insisting on applying the fairy door herself with a tiny brush. Burns held the board steady while she worked, his expensive jeans now decorated with paint splatters that would never wash out. When they finished, Ansel extended his hand to Burns. Not a challenge or a claim, just acknowledgement between 2 men who'd shown up for the same child's joy. Good work, Ansel said. You too, Burns replied, meaning it. Later, Burns would realize this was the first time he'd worked on something where the only metric for success was a 4-year-old's smile. No profit margins, no market share, no publicity value. Just Mira declaring it perfect for sunflowers while paint dried on all their hands. Sable's boundary talk, I'll support you being a father. I won't be a prop. Adult, not villain. Sophia found him that evening, still wearing his paint-stained clothes, staring at photos on his phone of Mira with her planter. She sat beside him on their pristine couch, designer dress meeting destroyed denim. We need to discuss boundaries, she said without preamble. Burns tensed, expecting ultimatums or accusations. Instead, Sophia's tone remained measured, mature. I'll support you being a father to Mira. She deserves that, and despite your failures, you deserve the chance to try. But I won't be a prop in that story. No fake stepmother performances, no media narratives about our blended family, no using our marriage to legitimize your access to her. I wouldn't ask. You would eventually, when it becomes convenient. Sophia's interruption was gentle but firm. We both know what we are to each other, Burns. Business partners who share a bed and a tax return. That's been enough for us. But that child needs authenticity, not another performance. She stood, smoothing her dress. Be her father if you can learn how, but don't drag our arrangement into it. She's already got Ansel showing her what real partnership looks like. Don't confuse her with our sophisticated emptiness. You're not empty, Burns said, surprising himself with the observation. Sophia smiled sadly. No, but we are together. And that's okay for us. We chose it. But Mira deserves better examples. Be a good father, Burns. Just don't pretend we're a good marriage. The field trip conflict. He can't go, he tells Mira early. Ansel already promised. No grand fix, just honest presence. The aquarium field trip notification came through Riley's planning committee email. Parent volunteers needed, permission slips required, excitement guaranteed. Burns saw it, and immediately began rearranging his calendar, ready to move meetings and delay deals to be there. Then, he saw the date. The Singapore merger would be finalizing that exact day. Not something he could delegate or delay. His presence was legally required for the signatures. For once, his absence would be genuinely unavoidable, not just prioritized away. He told Mira the next Saturday, while they painted birdhouses at the community center. "I can't come to the aquarium," he said simply. "I have to be in Singapore for work. But Ansel will be there." Mira considered this. Paintbrush paused. Ansel already said he'd come. He took the day off. "Good," Burns said, meaning it. "You'll have fun with him. Will you bring me something from Singapore?" Mira asked, 4-year-old pragmatism accepting the situation. "What would you like?" "A picture of you there, so I know where you were." No request for toys or treasures. Just proof of his whereabouts, evidence of honest absence rather than chosen priorities. Burns promised, and later would send her a photo of himself at the Singapore harbor, holding a sign that said Mira's dad was here. Bleachers, back row. He claps like a dad, not a headline. The preschool spring concert happened in the community center gymnasium. Folding chairs and bleachers arranged around a makeshift stage. Burns arrived early but chose a seat in the back row, understanding his place in the hierarchy of Mira's life. Riley and Ansel sat in the front row, cameras ready. Other parents filled the middle sections. Burns sat with the grandparents and distant relatives, people who loved from the margins. When Mira's class performed their Sunflower song, Burns clapped exactly as loud as every other parent. No standing ovation that would draw attention, no excessive enthusiasm that would make the moment about him. Just a father in the back row, proud and present, without requiring recognition. Mira saw him from the stage, waved once, then returned her focus to the performance. That single wave was worth more than any headline he'd ever generated. Internal slip, he forgets once, apologizes to Mira, not the internet. Foundation reforms, childcare vouchers, financial coaching, recipients on the planning committee. He votes with his power. The slip happened on a Thursday. Burns had promised to attend Mira's art class exhibition, a small event, where preschoolers displayed their masterpieces to their families. He'd put it in his calendar, set reminders, genuinely intended to be there. Then Tokyo called with a crisis, and muscle memory kicked in. He handled the emergency, saved the deal, and protected his empire. Only when his assistant mentioned leaving early for her daughter's recital did Burns remember what he'd forgotten. He didn't make excuses to Riley, didn't issue a public statement about work-life balance. Instead, he went to Mira directly the next Saturday. "I messed up," he told her simply. "I promised to see your art, and I wasn't there. I'm sorry." Mira studied him with those serious eyes. "Mommy said you had important work. Not more important than your art show. I made a mistake." "Everyone makes mistakes," Mira said, repeating something clearly learned from Riley or Ansel. "But you have to try better." "I will try better," Burns promised. And he did. The foundation reforms passed with his deciding vote. Childcare vouchers for all employees, financial coaching. That went beyond basic budgeting, and 3 seats on the planning committee for Homeward Keys recipients. Riley took one of those seats, appearing at monthly meetings with practical suggestions that cut through corporate abstraction. She never mentioned his personal failures in those professional settings. But she did push for reforms that would help other single parents avoid her struggles. Burns supported every initiative, using his power to amplify her voice rather than silence it. What small promise did you keep that changed everything? Comment on it. If you're still here, like, subscribe. I see you. Here's what Burns learned in work clothes and paint stains. Transformation doesn't happen in grand gestures. It happens in Saturday morning sawdust, in admitting you can't read a ruler, in clapping from the back row without needing credit. Every promise to Mira was a brick in a bridge back to humanity. Every Saturday at the community center was proof that presence weighs more than presence. Every foundation meeting where he elevated Riley's voice over his own ego was redemption in increments. The small promises matter more than the big performances. The quiet consistency matters more than the loud announcements. Showing up in jeans matters more than showing off in suits. What small promise did you keep that changed everything? Maybe it was calling when you said you would. Maybe it was attending the boring recital, the tedious game, the unglamorous moment that mattered only to one person. Maybe it was learning to fail in front of someone who needed to see you human more than heroic. Comment your small promise below. If you're still here, watching Burns learn to be a father instead of a headline, like and subscribe. I see you choosing presence over performance. Block party, sunflowers up, tea lights, potato salad diplomacy. Kids banner, welcome home. The Homeward Keys recipients had transformed their new street into a celebration of arrival. Mira's sunflowers stood tall in the planter Burns had helped build. Their faces turned toward the evening sun like golden witnesses. Tea lights lined the sidewalks in mason jars, creating a pathway of soft light between houses that had gone from corporate assets to actual homes. The neighbors brought their various versions of potato salad, 7 different recipes competing for supremacy through mayonnaise-based diplomacy. Folding tables held casseroles and cookies, lemonade and stories. Children ran between houses like they'd always lived here, already establishing territories and alliances. Above the main gathering area, the kids had painted a banner in primary colors, welcome home. Each letter was a different child's artwork, imperfect and enthusiastic. Mira had painted the O in yellow, naturally, with what appeared to be a sunflower growing through the center. Riley stood on her new porch, watching Ansel teach a group of kids how to check the string lights for loose connections. He explained electricity with the patience of someone who understood that knowledge was community property, meant to be shared rather than hoarded. The children listened with the intensity of those learning practical magic. The electrician who'd received the second house was grilling hot dogs with religious devotion, debating temperature control with the janitor who'd received the first house. Their children played together in the shared yard space, already building the friendships that would define their childhoods. This was what Sophia had meant by making it real instead of performing it. These families weren't photo opportunities or tax deductions. They were neighbors now, building something more valuable than property equity. They were building belonging. The block party was scheduled to start at 5. By 5:30, most guests had arrived, plates filled, conversations flowing. Burns was conspicuously absent, his empty promise hanging in the air like humidity before a storm. Riley checked her phone once, then deliberately put it away, choosing presence over anticipation. Burn arrives late from lifting a fridge for another family. Brings one thing, a book the kids made about belonging. Ask permission to give it. Burns arrived at 6:47, no fanfare, no driver, no excuse prepared. His shirt was sweat-stained, his jeans dirty at the knees, and he carried something under his arm wrapped in brown paper. He'd been helping another Homeward Keys recipient, a single father with a bad back, move a refrigerator up narrow stairs. The task had taken longer than expected, made him later than planned, but he'd finished what he started before coming here. Riley saw him first, her expression cycling through surprise that he'd come and approval of. How he'd come, quietly, honestly, wearing his lateness like admission rather than apology. Fridge? She asked, noting the sweat. Stairs, Burns confirmed. Sorry I'm late. You're here. That simple acknowledgement carried more weight than forgiveness. He was here, present, participating in the unglamorous reality of community building. No cameras followed him. No assistant documented his charity. He was just another neighbor, arriving late to the block party. Mira spotted him and ran over, her yellow dress already stained with watermelon juice and grass. You came. Did you bring your appetite? Mr. Rodriguez makes the best hot dogs. I brought something else, Burns said, kneeling to her level. He unwrapped the brown paper to reveal a handmade book, the kind kids create in art class with construction paper and staples. The cover read, What Home Means in letters written by different children's hands. Inside, each page was a different kid's drawing and caption. Home is where my dog sleeps. Home is where Mom makes pancakes. Home smells like my dad's coffee. The community center kids made it, Burns explained. For the families who got houses. But I wanted to ask permission before giving it to you. He was asking Mira, not Riley, treating her like someone whose consent mattered, whose boundaries deserved respect. Can I see it? Mira asked, already reaching but still asking. He steps on a milk crate. I mistook control for care. I'm sorry. I can't fix the past. I can show up now. The music lowered around 7:30 when someone announced toasts. The electrician thanked the foundation. The janitor thanked his new neighbors. Riley thanked Ansel, who deflected credit back to the community volunteers. It was organic, unscripted, the kind of gratitude that emerges from authentic experience rather than rehearsed performance. Then Mira, with the fearlessness of children who haven't learned social anxiety, called out, "Mr. Burns helped build my planter. He should talk." The crowd turned to Burns with mixed expressions: curiosity, skepticism, recognition. From those who'd seen the headlines about the awkward gala encounter, he could have declined, deflected, and maintained his comfortable position at the margins. Instead, he stepped onto a milk crate someone had been using as a side table. No podium, no microphone, no prepared remarks with focus-grouped messaging. Just a man standing on plastic in someone's front yard, surrounded by people who owed him houses but didn't owe him attention. I mistook control for care, Burns began, his voice steady but unpolished. For a long time, I thought providing meant loving. I thought if I built enough, bought enough, secured enough, that would equal being enough. I was wrong. The crowd quieted, sensing honesty rather than performance. I can't fix the past, can't undo the absence or erase the mistakes, can't buy back the moments I missed or the promises I broke, but I can show up now, can measure twice and cut once, can paint planters and move refrigerators, can learn that love isn't a transaction, it's presence, consistency, showing up even when nobody's watching to give you credit. He looked directly at Mira, who was eating a popsicle and watching him with serious attention. I'm learning to be a father instead of a benefactor, learning that a child needs your time more than your money, your attention more than your achievements. I'm learning slowly, but I'm learning. He stepped off the milk crate. That's all. Thank you for letting me be part of this. Applause, not frenzy, recognition. He pockets the speech, picks up a trash bag. Read the funny dog chapter twice because she asked. The applause came in measured waves, not the enthusiastic ovation of a gala, but the acknowledging recognition of community witnessing effort. Several people nodded. A few patted his shoulder as he stepped down. Nobody asked for selfies or business cards. They just accepted his words and returned to their conversations, which was exactly the response humility deserved. Burns had brought a prepared speech in his pocket, 3 pages, carefully crafted by his communications team, designed to generate the right kind of social media traction. He left it there, unread, choosing authenticity over optimization. Instead, he picked up a trash bag and started collecting empty plates and cups. Unglamorous work, the kind that happens after the photos get taken, when most VIPs have already left. But Burns stayed, working alongside Ansel and other volunteers, learning the rhythm of cleanup that mirrors community, everyone doing a little so no one does everything. When most of the mess was managed and darkness had settled completely, Mira appeared at his elbow with the handmade book he'd given her. Will you read it to me? She asked. Mommy's helping with the dishes. Burns looked toward Riley, who nodded permission from the kitchen window. He sat on the porch steps, Mira settling beside him with the comfortable proximity of a child who decided he was safe. The book contained 12 pages, 12 children's definitions of home. Mira's favorite was page 7, a drawing of a dog wearing a hat with the caption, "Home is where my funny dog lives, even though he can't really wear hats." She laughed at it the first time. I asked him to read it again. Then again. Burns read that page about the funny dog 3 times total, understanding that this was the work that mattered. Not the speeches or the donations or the headlines. Just a man on a porch, reading the same page repeatedly because a 4-year-old found joy in repetition, finding meaning in small moments he'd spent years dismissing as insignificant. Riley watched from inside, drying dishes beside Ansel, seeing Burns finally learning what She'd tried to teach him 5 years ago. Love is built in the margins, not the monuments. Ordinary gold montage, trellis sturdy, recipe notebook, forehead kiss at the sink, co-parenting calendar that actually works. The sunflower trellis Burns built with Ansel stood sturdy through 2 seasons, requiring only minor adjustments when autumn winds tested its foundation. Each repair became a lesson in maintenance versus acquisition, the understanding that building something once wasn't enough, that care required ongoing attention, that relationships were like structures needing regular inspection and reinforcement. Riley's kitchen counter accumulated a recipe notebook that became communal property. Ansel's chili recipe appeared on page 3. Burns's grandmother's lemon cake, the one thing he could make from memory, occupied page 17. Mira's contributions were mostly illustrations of food rather than actual recipes, but her drawing of pancakes with faces became the household's Saturday morning tradition. The forehead kiss at the sink happened without planning or performance. Riley was washing dishes one Thursday evening when Burns stopped by to return Mira's forgotten backpack. He'd found her favorite stuffed animal inside and knew she couldn't sleep without it. Riley thanked him, hands still soapy, and Burns kissed her forehead. Not romantic, not possessive, just acknowledgement of shared parenthood and mutual respect. She didn't pull away, didn't overthink it. Just said, "She's in her room if you want to deliver it yourself." The co-parenting calendar actually worked because Burns finally understood that consistency mattered more than compensation. When he promised Tuesday evening dinners, he appeared for Tuesday evening dinners. When he committed to alternating Saturdays, he protected those Saturdays like they were board meetings with his daughter as the only stakeholder who mattered. The calendar hung on Riley's refrigerator, color-coded and current. Blue for Burns's time, green for Ansel's coaching commitments, yellow for Mira's activities. When conflicts arose, they negotiated like adults who shared a goal rather than enemies fighting for territory. Mira learned to pack 2 bags, one for weekends at Burns's penthouse where he'd finally converted the unused nursery into an actual bedroom she'd helped design, another for regular life at home with Riley and increasingly present Ansel. She moved between worlds without trauma because the adults had finally learned to build bridges instead of walls. Burns kept work clothes in his car now, jeans and boots that no longer felt borrowed, flannel shirts that had earned their paint stains and sawdust through actual labor. He attended foundation meetings in suits, but changed before community center volunteering, understanding that different kinds of work required different uniforms. The ordinary moments accumulated like interest on an investment he couldn't measure in dollars. Helping with homework, attending parent-teacher conferences, standing in the rain waiting for the school bus because Mira wanted company. Each moment was a brick in a foundation that couldn't be photographed or publicized, but held up everything that mattered. Burns shifts the foundation from photo ops to shared power. Sable orders pizza for paint day. She's an ally, not a prop. The Hawthorne Foundation's quarterly reports started reading differently. Less emphasis on families served, and more attention to community members consulted. The shift from doing charity to sharing power happened in increments, each meeting moving them further from performance toward partnership. Riley's voice in planning sessions carried equal weight to Burns's checkbook. When she suggested the foundation fund financial literacy programs taught by community members, who'd actually overcome poverty rather than consultants who'd only studied it, Burns voted yes. When she proposed childcare during all foundation events so parents could participate fully, he allocated the budget personally. The recipient committee expanded from 3 seats to 7, then to full equality with the original board. Burns gave up majority control voluntarily, understanding that real change required shared governance rather than benevolent dictatorship. Some board members resigned in protest. Burns let them leave without counteroffers. Sophia became an unexpected ally in the transformation. She'd started attending paint days at the community center not for publicity, but because she'd discovered she actually enjoyed the work. Her background in design, the degree she'd earned before marrying money, became her primary occupation. Found purpose in helping families choose colors, arrange furniture, and maximize small spaces. "Pizza's here," Sophia announced one Saturday, arriving with enough boxes to feed 20 volunteers. She wore jeans that cost more than some people's rent, but had learned to kneel in them, paint in them, and work in them without worrying about replacement costs. She and Riley had developed a relationship that defied easy categorization, not friends exactly, but allies in the shared project of teaching Burns humility. They coordinated schedules, compared notes on his progress, occasionally shared knowing looks when he slipped into old patterns of trying to solve emotional problems with financial solutions. He offered to buy Mira's entire preschool new playground equipment, Riley mentioned one afternoon while they painted a community room. "Let me guess," Sophia replied. "Because she mentioned the swings were squeaky?" "Exactly. I'll talk to him." Again, their alliance wasn't a romantic competition. It was two women who'd both been treated as acquisitions rather than partners, working together to teach one man that love operated on different principles than business. Voiceover morals, woven through images. Real wealth is presence. Pride can't parent, humility can. Boundaries protect what's growing. Real wealth is presence. Burns learned this truth in increments, each lesson costing him something he'd previously valued. The Singapore deal he'd walked away from to attend Mira's first swim class. The networking dinner he'd declined to help build stage props for her school play. The board meeting he'd left early when she called crying about a nightmare. Each choice to be present cost him opportunities his younger self would have killed for. But each choice also deposited something into an account that actually compounded his daughter's trust. By her 5th birthday, Mira no longer asked, "Will you come?" with doubt in her voice. She assumed his presence, which meant he'd finally become reliable. Pride can't parent, humility can. The lesson arrived through repeated failure and eventual acceptance. Burns had wanted to be the perfect divorced dad, the one who never missed anything, never made mistakes, instantly transformed from absent to exemplary. But perfection was just another form of performance, another way to avoid the vulnerable work of actually changing. The first time he admitted to Mira that he didn't know how to braid hair and asked Riley to teach him, pride screamed that he should hire someone, watch YouTube privately, maintain the illusion of competence. Humility whispered that asking for help modeled something more valuable than appearing capable. He learned to braid sitting on Riley's couch, Riley's hands guiding him, Ansel, offering commentary from the kitchen where he cooked dinner they'd all share. The scene would have humiliated his former self. His current self recognized it as grace. Boundaries protect what's growing. Riley's boundaries had seemed like rejection when she first established them. No dropping by unannounced. No gifts without asking first. No making promises to Mira without confirming with Riley. No trying to buy access or influence through generosity. Burns had initially chafed against each limitation, seeing them as obstacles to relationship rather than framework for it. But over time, he'd recognized that Riley's boundaries weren't walls to keep him out. They were scaffolding to hold something new while it strengthened. The boundaries protected Mira from disappointment, Riley from being overwhelmed, and Burns from his own worst impulses to perform love rather than practice it. Within those boundaries, real relationships could grow. Not the fantasy he'd wanted, but the reality they could all survive. When he respected Riley's no about attending Mira's doctor appointments in the first year, she eventually offered a yes to him joining for the school registration meeting. Trust grew where boundaries created safety. Community multiplies change. Don't confuse control with care. Start where you are. Community multiplies change. Burns had built an empire alone, viewing relationships as transactions and partnerships as strategic advantages. The foundation had operated on the same principle: wealthy benefactors distribute resources to grateful recipients. One direction, clear hierarchy, controlled outcomes. But the transformed foundation operated like a garden, where multiple hands tended shared soil. The financial literacy program taught by former recipients reached more families than any consultant-led initiative. The childcare cooperative started by foundation families served the entire neighborhood. The tool library Ansel organized multiplied impact beyond anything Burns could have purchased and distributed. Change multiplied when ownership was shared, when community members became designers. rather than recipients, when power was distributed rather than hoarded. Burns learned that his money worked harder when he held it more loosely. Don't confuse control with care. The sentence Riley had spoken years ago finally made sense. Burns had controlled his relationship with her, scheduled their time, determined their future, decided what love should look like. He'd called it care. But control had suffocated what it claimed to protect. With Mira, he practiced care without control. He couldn't determine her feelings about him, couldn't force her affection, couldn't guarantee outcomes. He could only show up consistently and let relationships develop at its own pace. Care meant creating conditions for growth, not dictating what should grow. Start where you are. Burns had wanted to arrive at fatherhood fully formed, competent, worthy. He'd wanted to skip the awkward learning phase, the mistakes, the visible incompetence. But starting where he was, ignorant, unskilled, trying, turned out to be the only real starting point available. He started not knowing how to braid hair, so he learned. Started not knowing Mira's favorite color, so he asked. Started not knowing how to be present, so he practiced. Each beginning acknowledged his actual position rather than his desired one, and honest starting points led to actual progress. You can't begin from where you wish you were, only from where you actually are. Final frame, porch light, inside laughter, city tower reflected in a man learning to be reachable. The porch light at Riley's house glowed warm against the evening darkness. Inside, visible through windows that no longer needed curtains because this home held nothing requiring hiding. Laughter spilled out like light itself. Mira's giggle, Riley's lower laugh, Ansel's rumbling chuckle, and, new addition, Burns' rusty approximation of joy, still learning its rhythm but genuine in its attempt. They were playing some board game that Mira was definitely cheating at. House rules allowing creative interpretation of dice rolls. Burns sat on the floor because Mira had claimed his chair. And he'd learned that challenging a 5-year-old's territorial assertions was a battle not worth fighting. His expensive suit jacket hung on Riley's coat rack beside Ansel's work jacket and Mira's butterfly raincoat. Through the window, if you looked at the right angle, the city skyline was visible in the distance. The Hawthorne Grand stood among the towers, glass and steel catching the city lights. Burns's name in letters visible from highways, his empire, his monument, his proof of success. But reflected in the window glass, superimposed over that distant tower, was Burns himself, sitting cross-legged on a second-hand rug, arguing good-naturedly with a kindergartner about whether dragons should be allowed to buy Park Place. His reflection overlaid his achievement, presence, superimposed on prestige. He was learning to be reachable, not just available through assistants and scheduled appointments, but actually reachable, responding to texts, without delay, answering calls even during meetings, showing up when called without calculating the cost. His phone sat on the coffee table, notifications disabled. Whatever empire needed managing could wait until after Mira's bedtime. After the game ended, after these moments that couldn't be postponed or delegated. The tower stood in the distance, permanent as ego. But the porch light glowed warm with the temporary precious gold of ordinary evenings with people who'd learned to let him in, not because of what he owned, but because of who he was slowly becoming. Like, share, and subscribe to Rich Billionaires romance stories. Comment which moment hit hardest, the freeze, the planter, or the milk crate apology. I'll pin the best take. So which moment broke you? Was it the freeze at the gala? Burns standing on stage, scissors in hand, confronting the daughter he'd never known existed while cameras captured his perfect life cracking in real time? That moment when success and failure occupied the same frame, when the woman he'd lost walked in holding proof of what his absence had cost? Or maybe it was the planter. 3 people, a billionaire, a construction foreman, and a 4-year-old. Building something together without hierarchy or competition. Just hands working wood, paint staining expensive jeans, a fairy door applied with a child's careful concentration. That moment when Burns realized building his daughter's dream mattered more than building his empire. Or perhaps the milk crate apology hit deepest. A man who commanded boardrooms standing on borrowed plastic, speaking without script or strategy, admitting that he'd confused control with care, that he couldn't fix the past, but could show up for the present. That moment when he chose honesty over image, confession over performance. Each moment was a key turning in a different lock. The freeze opened awareness. You can't fix what you won't face. The planter opened participation. Showing up matters more than standing out. The milk crate opened humility. Admission is the price of admission to a real relationship. Burns's journey from empire builder to present father isn't finished. He'll still mess up, still default to solving with money rather than showing up with time. But he's learning, and learning is the work that matters. Like this video. If you believe people can change when change costs them something, share it if you know someone confusing control with care. Someone building monuments when they should be building connections. Subscribe to Rich Billionaires romance stories because we tell tales about wealth that can't be measured in dollars, presence, consistency, showing up even when nobody's watching to give you credit. Comment which moment hit you hardest, the freeze, the planter, or the milk crate apology. I'll pin the best take because your insights matter more than my conclusions. And remember, real wealth is measured in forehead kisses and braiding lessons, in paint-stained jeans, and attended recitals, in being reachable when it matters more than being remarkable when it doesn't.